More people are killed every year by diabetes than by guns. So if you really want to save lives, you should maybe consider banning soda and potato chips, or at least making those not eligible food items on SNAP benefits.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out another episode of the Left Mike, Right Mike show. I am Left Mike on Twitter at Debate Left Mike. You can also follow along on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you're looking we should be. And over there, the big proponent of the day is Mr. Right Mike.
Today we're actually going to be talking about the Second Amendment and some common sense gun control measures, because unlike a lot of conservatives, I don't believe that all gun control is bad. I think there are some common sense things, and probably the wrong term to use for it, since the left likes to call things I wouldn't consider common sense to be common sense. But common sense for the majority of pro-Second Amendment folks. Perhaps we could agree on some things and make the country safer without really infringing upon our Second Amendment rights.
My argument is that there is certainly a lot that we can do to fix the problem. I think that the availability of guns in the United States is a major player and component of our elevated murder rate. And I think that there are quite a few things that we could do that do not infringe upon the Second Amendment, but would keep the American people a bunch safer. And we'll see how much Right Mike likes those ideas.
We will see once we get to that point. See, I think one of the fundamental issues with the left just stems from a total lack of knowledge about guns. But in reality, I do believe the Second Amendment right is essential for the reasons stated in the Constitution. So, well...
Sorry. I think that I have to agree with Justice Warren Burger, who was conservative Chief Justice of the Court for many, many years, who, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's damn close, he called the Second Amendment the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on the American people. I think it's absolutely foolish to think that the Second Amendment was
written... Do you live next to a railroad track?
I do. I do live next to a railroad track.
Nice.
At 3 a.m. no less. 3 a.m. He'll come back by. So he's early tonight.
No, go ahead. Justice Hamburger.
So the Hamburger, Justice Warren Burger. Jesus, have some respect. He called it one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated on the American people. That the Second Amendment was never meant to what it's claimed to be now, and certainly does not imply that every citizen has the right to be armed. I'm not saying we should change the law based on his single opinion. I'm just saying that I absolutely believe in the scholarly and legal interpretation of the Second Amendment prior to about 1960 or 70, whenever the NRA started chipping away at it. I think that you join the National Guard, you can have guns in your house. I think that's what it meant.
It's not. This is not the military in the modern sense of the word, because we freed ourselves from England.
Right.
So the idea of well-regulated militia being the U.S. federal government doesn't hold water for me, because that's how we became a country in the first place, was by fighting off our own tyrannical government.
No, right, but militia and citizens are different. Not every citizen is counted in a militia.
I believe in the idea that it's for defense against tyrannical government.
I think that's funny, but I think that's what they meant it for, without realizing that drones were going to be a thing.
People that think that it's crazy, it doesn't matter if you had AR-15s or not, you can never defend against the military. Well, first off, that's a complete fallacy, because in the event that you were at war with the U.S. military, what are they going to be shooting at you with? M4s, which fire a 5.56 millimeter round. Where do you get all the magazines and all the ammunition? So just having the same weaponry as your enemy already doesn't put you at an advantage, but already removes a lot of your disadvantage. Now, whether or not it's a 3-round burst or it's semi-automatic only is a different conversation. But the idea that having the AR-15 versus not having the AR-15 makes no difference in the defense.
You're literally bringing an AR-15 to a drone fight.
You think there's going to be drones flying all over every city in America fighting people. If there was some sort of mass civil war,
I think if the United States government turns tyrannical, I don't think there is absolutely, as long as there was enough troops to support said force, because I know there'd be some abandonment, but if it turned tyrannical,
yeah, I think the abandonment would be much more widespread than you.
If it turned tyrannical, I don't think there's a single thing that any man in this country could do to stop it, because we have allowed the military to become so bloated and powerful in terms of nationalism and imperialism that if they turn that inwards, you're going to have, doomsday prep, right? You can have pockets of resistance that might last longer than others, but I think it would be like Canada invading or United States invading Canada. I think it would be a couple knocks at the door and say, all right.
Now, so there's less than 2 million, I think there's less than like 1.5 million active duty military, Army, by the way, Army soldiers, not all of whom are going to be combat arms either. So if you take the Marine Corps, you take combat arms of the Army, National Guard units, take reserve personnel and stuff, you're probably still only talking about 3 million, maybe something like that. The U.S. military can't take over the U.S. It's just not that big. It doesn't work like that. Because in the idea that there's a tyrannical government, all these guys that are National Guard soldiers and stuff aren't going to be showing up at their unit to go fight their neighbor.
I've already said that I don't think that's what the amendment was written for. My opinion on that is absolutely worthless. Warren Burger's is much better, but still in its own is just an opinion. So I'm giving you, and conceding the point that we need to be armed as a citizenry.
But what do you think is wrong with our current gun policies? What do you think is wrong with the law right now? And what would you change to make it safer?
Yeah, so I think that the problem is access to firearms, I think, is far too easy. So I think that if your gun is used for something, you're at least a little bit liable for not having secured. That's on you. I think the private sale loophole should be closed. I think that every time someone buys a gun, we should know that the person buying that gun is legally able to do so. So I think the way you do that is by introducing criminal penalties on the seller of a gun who sells a gun without going through a background check. And you can do that either through a gun broker, where you bring it into a gun store and they broker the deal, or you can set up a website in the same way you check a driver's license, check their gun ID number, if you will, and if they're legally able, great. You produce like a transaction ID, and then you're good, and you've mostly avoided the big, scary, bad database. But it's just things like that. I think there's reasonable measures we can take. Clip size or magazine size, whatever one won't get me mocked by the alt-right. I think that's something that makes sense. There's no reason that you need, 45 rounds into your, assault weapon. Let me trigger them some more. There's no reason you need 45 rounds in your assault weapon unless you're hunting humans. So if I'm infringing only on your hobby and your ability to reload quickly for sport, and we can save
make it less likely to
a few lives, then it's totally worth it.
Well, maybe you just, instead of someone carrying one 30-round magazine, they carry 3 10-round magazines. And that 30-round magazine may have had a catastrophic failure and damaged the magazine, and they couldn't shoot any more bullets out of it. But instead, they had 3 10-round magazines. It's a pointless debate.
Either reloading is very easy, in which case don't complain you have to do it.
Easy.
Or reloading does create some opportunity for error.
It is easy. It's a huge the magazine restriction one that I see. I don't see any evidence that it would have saved lives anywhere. Is my point there. So I don't think there's any argument for that. Certainly nothing discernible. However, on the flip side, that is one of the more fundamental issues with being able to defend against tyrannical government. So if I'm carrying a full basic load in the U.S. Army, you're going to carry 7 30-round magazines, 210 rounds. So for me to carry 210 rounds, instead, I'd have to carry 21 magazines, as opposed to a normal soldier that would only have to do that with 7. To me, rights are not, I have to prove why I need this right to have this right. To me, it's you have to prove why I can't have this, to take this right away from me, to impose a law that restricts
because high-capacity magazines in assault weapons have been used way too often in mass shootings.
And if they didn't have assault weapons available, Virginia Tech, for example, what you want to consider assault weapons,
not every
didn't have any
not
assault
every
weapons,
mass,
and it
not,
was
not
super
every
lethal.
not every mass shooting has been done with semi-autos. But if the lethality doesn't change, then why do these guys use assault weapons to begin, or
It's certainly
semi-auto?
easier. It's certainly easier for them to carry one rifle with 30 rounds in it, maybe, but or they think it's cool. It's a Call of Duty thing. It's like what the Army uses. I mean, I don't think that unless you're highly trained with it, I don't think an AR-15 is going to be the most effective weapon for mass shooting. I think handguns would be way better. Your maneuverability at short ranges will be much better. Most people are going to be more comfortable and have more experience shooting a handgun. They're easier to reload and easier to handle unless you have experience running the gun. Virginia Tech, he killed a bunch of people, didn't have any assault weapons.
No, I listen. Again, and not one of my
I don't
more
believe they had any
important
AR-15s at Columbine either.
They did not.
So I don't think the argument that somehow limiting the capacity on AR-15s.
Why do you need a large capacity magazine? Like, what purpose does that serve?
So again, I don't think it's up. First off, I don't think it's up to me to justify why I need something for you to say I'm allowed to have it.
If it's
again, I think the law works. It kills people with one bullet. Doesn't matter how many.
So why don't we see more like murder sprees with bolt action rifles? Because
if you're choosing which one, if we only had bolt action rifles available, guess what? Bolt action rifle murders would go through the roof. If that was the only firearm that was available,
right? But they would not be able to kill as many people as quickly.
If you have a choice, are you arguing to get? Yes, you know what? Gun murders would be reduced if we got rid of all guns except for bolt action rifles.
Okay, I'm not arguing for that, but correct.
So then what's your point if you're not arguing for that? That's something that would work. I'm not going to advocate for that ever.
I'm saying that high capacity magazines are not something that are necessary at all.
Show me what data there is to support the idea that if you got rid of high capacity magazines,
you don't think if these mass shootings that if I had to stop and reload every 5 or 6.
San Bernardino shooting was in California, right?
No, I'm not saying all of them, man, and that's the thing, right?
That's a state that limits you to 10 round.
Not right, but I'm not saying all of them. You're not going to stop on any gun policy I have or anyone has. You're not going to stop all of the things. So no matter what I throw out to you, you're always going to be able to say, "What about this?" Well, of course that.
Because
but what
you believe that we should limit the freedom of every single American and take away one of the most fundamental parts of the Second Amendment, which
high
is
capacity magazine. Show me in the Constitution where it says high capacity.
High capacity magazines. One of the most fundamental parts of the Second Amendment. Because it is so that we can defend against a tyrannical government.
I don't care why the amendment is why. I've already given up on that. You win. It's for an armed citizenry. So I think one of the more important things that we could do is close the private sale loophole. Do you agree, or can you at least agree, that every time we sell a gun, we should be checking to ensure that the person buying that gun should be legally able to do so?
Yeah, I actually like the idea that you have about an online system where you have, maybe it just goes on your driver's license or something as like, firearm owner, whatever. And then that you can type in the driver's license number into an online system and it says yes. So that way, if let's say you get flagged for something, it gets flagged in the system immediately. So I get the idea of having that system and wanting people to use it. And I think most people would use it. For example, every time I've sold a gun private sell, I have done a bill of sale with a picture of the firearm and the serial number, and I had a copy of that person's driver's license front and back. The idea is I don't think someone's going to sign a bill of sale with that gun serial number on it and give me a copy of their driver's license if they're a felon or something. Because they're committing another felony by doing that.
I think that's a great example of the term well-regulated. Like, yes, you can buy guns. Yes, you can own guns. Yes, you can even sell those guns to whoever you want. But just like when we sold you the gun, we want you to make sure that person is legally able to own a gun. And I think that would be very fair and choke off the supply of guns.
The problem I like the idea in theory. The problem I have is with enforcement. Somebody comes up with a gun and then says, "Oh yeah, I bought this gun." You just ask them, "Oh, who'd you buy the gun from?"
Yeah,
like,
so
I think
guy. I think that number one, the serial number would help. But even without that,
how is the serial number going to help? There's no national gun registry, and that's my point. I think the only way to enforce the system of transfers is to have a gun registry, which
You
I'm
wouldn't
against.
necessarily have to have a registry because you could, I mean, generate a transaction ID that was just coded to a serial number so that it didn't actually link those two together until you kind of like deconstructed it, if you will.
That's the same
Uh,
thing as a gun registry because you could
it's not
deconstruct the
it's not
entire thing
you
and
you
know
could,
every
but
gun's ownership.
you think a gun registry is infringing on rights. I don't at all. I think a gun registry is a fine idea. We track cars, and there's a hell of a lot less of a reason to track those than there are guns.
Oh, I've thought this one through, and I've at times thought maybe a gun registry would be a good idea. I've thought of maybe some sort of tax rebate program where you have a voluntary gun registry where you get a tax rebate for every gun that you choose to register, something like that, to where you're setting up a voluntary system with incentives as opposed to forcing it on everybody. I've thought about a harder system of gun registry in which we don't enforce it as so you're it's a soft registry where it's like you're supposed to register all your guns, but unless you ever get caught using it in a crime, you'll never be punished. So if you were to use it in a self-defensive crime or something like that, even doesn't matter because. But if you ever get caught
Right.
using it in another crime, then it becomes a major felony, something like that. Where I think most people like myself, I'm thinking, what would I do under that system? I would probably register like 75% of my guns, and I would have have my like off-label guns, in case
I
of
think
a full-scale
the
civil
easiest
war.
way to meet in the middle would be it would be grandfathered. Any gun that you have right now, I don't need registered. You having that gun is fine, but now when you sell it on to the next person, they've legally got to register it, right?
Well,
And it would be hard to enforce.
I think you're not thinking of some of the other effects that would happen. Like I don't think that Miguel can mule in an AR-15 in his colon like he can a couple of grams of black tar heroin, but I think that they'd find other ways to get illegal firearms into the country en masse because there would be such a hot market for it. I think it's like banning drugs in a lot of places where, I mean, like Singapore is a unique case because it works for them for a lot of reasons, but like in the U.S., ban drugs, and what happens is it becomes a lot more crime. We start creating big cartel problems and things that didn't exist before. So all the cartels are going to get bigger into the gun trade, and we're going to have more border conflicts and stuff. We're going to have more, Coast Guard shootouts and random crap like that.
I think it's apples to lampshades. I think that it's just a completely different dynamic because
I don't ever want to see a mandatory registry with things grandfathered. I think that you're not thinking of the other effects that would have. I think we've beat it already. That's time to move on.
So what's the point of then there's no way for universal background checks. So you'd rather avoid all of these maybe weird cloud problems and allow criminals to essentially be able to to sell guns to
I'd be
criminals.
curious for people smarter than I that have access to more data and more researching ability than I have to figure out what the impacts might be of, let's say, a voluntary registry. Maybe do some polls and things and see how much adoption there would be on a voluntary registry, maybe with incentives in place for that, where you can buy guns. Your tax rebate is you can buy any gun that, even if it's a gun that you choose to register, you get tax free.
I'm not good with the tax rebate for gun owners. I think that's rewarding the wrong portion of the population.
People that choose to voluntarily register their gun get to buy the gun tax free. Then basically, so they get a rebate on the taxes they paid on the gun.
Oh, on the gun, that's fine. No problem with that. I just don't want like income tax deductions because
so that way, when I'm going in to buy a new AR-15, I can go, oh, I can throw my name into the voluntary registry and save, $70.
Right. Yeah, that's fine. I have no problem with that. At the core of the argument, let me ask you this. Do you believe that the U.S. laws create an environment that are lax enough to create an environment for ease of access to firearms that most countries don't see, and as a direct result of that, we have a murder rate that is starkly higher than many developed nations? Because that's my core argument, and that's my driver for wanting to push for change.
So, no, I don't, because guns are used a lot more for self-defense than they are in violent crime, first off. And you didn't mention gun deaths, which I'm thankful for, because a lot of folks bring up gun deaths in the U.S. versus other countries, which is really disingenuous because it includes suicides.
Right, but the number that 30,000 Americans die every year from guns is both accurate, but 20,000 of them are suicides. So that's fine, but the fact that there are still 10,000 people dying every year, and our murder rate is over 5 per 100K. Comparable nations, Canada's at like 1.5. A lot of European countries are at like 1. or below. So, we're 4 or 5 times higher, more likely to be killed in the United States of America than we are someplace else.
So
Why is that?
The U.S. has a very unique problem with gun murders, and I'm sure that this isn't going to be news to you. The gun deaths that do exist, and first off, violent crime has been falling for a long time in the United States, which is a good thing. But areas where you're going to see the most gun murders are going to be places like Chicago. There are going to be places that already have the strictest gun laws, and a majority of the gun murders are black-on-black homicides, oftentimes gang-related, and that's a unique cultural problem in the U.S. that nobody wants to talk about or address, but it's there. And if you take those murders out of the statistics, the U.S. does not have a crazy murder rate.
So I've got 80% of U.S. homicides are gang-related, which still leaves you with 20%, and that's not enough.
That would be, 20% would put you right down there with Canada.
But that's just gun homicides, right? So we've factored out the other homicides. You
the murder rate.
Still have.
We'd have to look. We have to break down the other murders. So you have to break down also because you don't know how many of the murders are gang related.
You're right. So there's more behind that. There's more behind that statistic.
I think that's a unique cultural problem in the U.S. that we're not addressing, and I think one of the big things that we'll talk about later is poor schooling in those areas. I think that's leading to a lot of it. So encouraging single motherhood is leading to a lot of it.
Well, I'm not going to argue those. I do want to just refute Chicago for the conservatives listening, because I hear this all the time, and it drives me absolutely crazy with how ignorant it is. They point to Chicago as being a gun-free zone, and look how high crime is. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous, because it's like saying not to piss into one end of the pool, right? Chicago can have all the laws they want, but when you can jump across the border, take a 40-minute drive, go to a pawn shop, buy a gun, bring it back. Those laws
Obama made that argument. So did Rahm Emanuel.
Are effectively great.
It's not our laws that are the problem. Like, our laws have nothing to do with it. Then why is it in Indiana? Then why is it in Indiana where they have more guns? Aren't there lower? Isn't there higher crime? If the whole idea is that it's because they're getting them from Indiana, there should still be less guns if we're restricting the guns somehow. But there's
so what I'm saying
less
is that
crime.
Chicago's a pocket of violence because only the bad guys have guns, right? And it's not a gun-free zone. I just want to point out that no, Chicago is not an example of why gun laws don't work. That's fallacy. It's garbage.
That is a great example.
Really, because you can look at countries without access to any guns, and the crime is just objectively lower, right? So the idea
that about very homogenous, like Scandinavian countries.
Some are, some aren't. Canada has a very diverse culture, and yet very little.
We talked about this before, and we have a bet going that if Canada is more diverse than the U.S., I have to do a show shirtless, and vice versa. So I think, in summary, I think guns are used a lot more often for self-defense than they are to commit violent crimes, which I think is a good thing, because I do see a gun as an equalizer. My mother has a concealed handgun license. She is 5'3". There's no way on earth she's going to, with someone like me, a 210-pound dude, 6 feet tall. I'm not going to come after a 5'3" woman, and she's going to defend herself against me. Unless it's Ronda Rousey, it's not going to happen. So the gun becomes an equalizer, and it adds a measure of safety and security for those that need it the most. So I really believe in responsible firearm ownership. I do like the idea of Mike's online registry idea, not online registry, online background check idea. I think that system, most gun owners would want to use it, and I think that would prevent a lot of private sales to people that shouldn't buy them, because I would be willing to bet most of those sales are happening when the seller is unaware that the buyer is not able to buy. And we would like to be aware if it didn't cost us anything.
All right. So another one of the hot button points is the assault weapons ban, and I use that term loosely because I'm not ridiculous. That is not an assault weapon, right? That is a semi-automatic rifle with a rail on it, right? It cannot spray bullets like the liberal media would have you say.
Oh, no, this is actually what they're talking about with these. I mean, in 1994, I think it was assault weapons ban included AR-15s.
But listen, what I'm saying is that when someone says assault weapons,
they're usually thinking because it looks like the military rifle. They're usually thinking that it's the same,
and not the case. And I realize that. Here's what I'll say about the assault weapons ban, because I do not support it. But here's why. It's not that I don't think it works. I actually manually pulled the data from the assault weapons ban and
to take away if you take away this rifle, there will be less killings with that rifle. That's common sense.
Right.
But you know as well as I do that it did not impact gun homicides overall.
My problem with it is
that
that
I don't think so.
even when you have an outlier event like the Vegas shooting or like one of the other mass shootings in which an AR-15 has been used, even in those years, we don't see deaths by long rifles exceed about 100 Americans. If we want to start limiting the rights of 330 million people based on 100 deaths, what causes 100 deaths, we're going to be out of things real quick. Is it tragic? Absolutely. Should we do things to stop it? Of course. But I think that background checks, having legal gun owners secure their firearms properly and be held liable if they don't, I think that would go a lot further than just the assault weapons ban. So conservatives, I'll side with you on that one. I am not for the confiscation or ban of any firearms that are currently readily available. For me to wrap up, I largely agree that confiscation it's not going to be America's answer. I don't want to say it's not the answer because I think it would do great things, but we're never going to have the public support for it, so I'm over arguing that point. But I do think that even as a progressive that abandons the notion of confiscation and any kind of gun ban, I think there are a lot of things that we can do and ensuring that guns are only freely going to those that are responsible and legally should have them. I think that universal background checks should absolutely be mandatory, and those that selling guns not doing that should be held liable. But I think that progressives, I think that we need to band together on this one and really look at the political landscape, realize about the only one issue that we could get through with continued effort would be like the assault weapons ban, and it's really ineffective. We're not going to save that many people into something that's going to polarize a lot of the country. So go after the universal background checks, go after responsible gun ownership, but confiscation is just going to polarize, and I think we're going to lose.
And keep in mind that more people are killed every year by diabetes than by guns. So if you really want to save lives, you should maybe consider banning soda and potato chips, or at least making those not eligible food items on SNAP benefits. Stop.
So I think that it's disingenuous to say, oh, we can't fix this problem because we have this other problem. And I think that's what that is.
I didn't say we can't fix it, but I said that to keep things in perspective.
Okay, good.
But thank you guys for checking out another episode of the Left Mike, Right Mike show. Check us out at leftmikerightmike.com. Fantastic website.
It's a great website. And we're available on all major platforms. YouTube, we should be up on Spotify and iTunes any day now if we're not already. Facebook, Instagram, we're going to post breaking news and all that good stuff. Make sure you guys are up to date on all the best news. We'll drop some fun quotes in there. And, of course, you'll always have our award-winning commentary. I don't know which awards yet, but I'm sure they're coming with Mr. Right Mike and myself, Mr. Left Mike. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Oh, and don't forget, we also have Patreon now, so if you want access to the uncensored full-length videos, if you want to subscribe to Left Mike, Right Mike on Patreon, we have a bunch of different tiers.
leftmikerightmike.com/support has those tiers listed. You can pick one starting at just $2 a month, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah, and Left Mike is still saving to replace those mini binds, and those awful $8 Walmart mini blinds do need some treatments, so that every dollar on Patreon will help to replace those mini blinds after Mike's chemotherapy is paid for. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.